Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January 15th regular meeting of Parksville City Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. Coming up first, we have the consent agenda for the minutes of the council meeting held December 18th, 2023, and also approval of the council meeting agenda. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendations as follows? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. Carries unanimous. Presentations. We'll get right to it. We have one presentation today. I didn't miss anybody here. We have one presentation today. We have a presentation from BC Housing for an overview of the housing initiatives. We have Jennifer Fox and Sarah, Sarah Smith. Thank you, Sarah. Jennifer Fox and Sarah Smith from BC Housing doing a presentation in response to Council Resolution 23.062, requesting an overview of housing initiatives, including below market housing, affordable housing, housing for seniors, supportive housing, extreme weather response, and related BC housing subsidy programs such as SAFER. Sarah and Jennifer, welcome to the podium here. We got two chairs set up for you already. No, you can't hide back there. You get to come to the big table. Thank you for showing up today, ladies. We have 10 minutes slated for your presentation, and start anytime you like. You got all the microphone lit up, so I think you've been here before. So where we go. The floor is yours. Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for having us. Pleased to introduce Jennifer Fox. For anyone that doesn't know her, she is the Director of Operations for the Vancouver Island region. And I am Jennifer's counterpart, Sarah. I'm the Director of Development. Firstly, we'd like to acknowledge that BC Housing conducts our activities on the homelands of thousands of Indigenous peoples and many nations across British Columbia. We acknowledge with gratitude that today we are discussing housing on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish Nations, home to the Snanawas First Nation and the Qualicum First Nations. We need to. There we go. Thank you. BC Housing works in partnership with private and nonprofit sector partners, health authorities, ministries, and all levels of government and community groups to develop a range of housing in British Columbia. Our goal is to address critical gaps across the housing ecosystem, from emergency shelters and rental assistance all the way to private market affordable homeownership. BC Housing works to serve individuals who are homeless, individuals with disabilities, Indigenous individuals and families, women and children at risk of violence, low income seniors and families, and moderate and middle income buyers of new homes. Sorry. Doesn't want to listen to me. There we go. Thanks, Sarah.
There are a number of programs under which BC Housing provides funding to address homelessness. There are the Emergency Shelter programs under this heading, which include 24/7 year-round shelter operations, as well as temporary shelters that typically operate during winter season. It could be from October to April. The other we fund is the Extreme Weather Response Program, which is a community-based and community-led program. It's operated by a nonprofit service provider. It's for winter season only, and provincially that means October 15th to April 15th. And shelters open only when the extreme weather response alert is issued in the community. And so funding will be for operations, and it typically does not include capital or startup costs, insurance, or admin fees. Operations are genuinely 12-hour overnight operations with nightly service delivery, staffing, volunteer appreciation, cleaning, food, bus tickets, laundry, first aid supplies.
There we go. Through Building BC's Supportive Housing Fund, the province is investing $1.2 billion over 10 years to deliver 2,500 new homes with 24/7 support services for people who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of homelessness. BC Housing is leading the creation of the supportive housing projects in partnership with nonprofits and Indigenous providers, government authorities, and community groups. The buildings and land will be owned by the province under SHF. Also included in this Building BC investment is the Women's Transition Housing Fund, which is another $734 million over 10 years to build and operate an additional 1,500 new units of housing. This includes transitional housing, safe houses, second stage, and long-term housing. The Women's Transition Fund provides women and their children who are at risk of violence and/or have experienced violence with access to safe and secure confidential services. Nonprofit providers who specialize in housing and supports for women and children who are experiencing or at risk of violence operate the housing, and the province through BC Housing selects those operators through a request for proposal process.
You want to change? One more.
That wants me to, yeah. So this is the Community Housing Fund. You've likely heard of this one very recently. This is $3.3 billion investment to build more than 20,000 affordable rental homes for people with moderate and low incomes. Approximately 9,000 of these homes are open already, and more are underway across the province. The Community Housing Fund recently received funds for an additional 6,000 new homes for families and seniors. Over the next 4 years, the plan is to issue additional CHF proposal calls on a recurring, ongoing basis. CHF is one of many of our housing funds available. There's also the Indigenous Housing Fund. Sorry, lost my notes here. The province is taking action to build homes for Indigenous peoples in our province. We're working hard with our partners to make housing better in all communities. The Indigenous Housing Fund has received funds for an additional 1,750 new homes, and this is both on and off reserve. This program is aimed at Indigenous families, elders, individuals, persons with disabilities who are able to live independently without support services. Units developed under the Indigenous Housing Fund are 100% rent geared to income, or fixed rents are also considered on reserve.
There are additional funding programs in the housing ecosystem that allow folks to select a private market rental unit. The rental assistance program is for eligible low-income working families where they could be eligible to receive a cash assistance to help offset their cost of rent. So in effect, it's a subsidy, but they're able to select their own unit where they live. There's also the shelter aid for elderly renters, known as SAFER, and that is for low-income seniors aged 60 or over. And it's the same concept where they're able to use that cash assistance to pay their rent in a market unit of their choosing. And to access those programs, folks can reach out to our applicant services and go to our website and do an application online as well.
The Housing Hub is a division within BC Housing. It's established to seek partnerships with local housing organizations, community land trusts, Indigenous groups, faith-based organizations, and the development community with the core goal of increasing the supply of affordable housing for middle-income earners. The Housing Hub is quite distinct from traditional BC housing programs in that those partnerships do not operate with grants and subsidies. So by expanding the range of partners BC Housing is able to collaborate with, the Housing Hub is able to work to infuse the market in British Columbia with affordable options, both rental and for affordable homeownership. BC Housing's Housing Hub has access to a dedicated $2 billion financing amount to put towards financing construction for thousands of new homes for middle-income families in the province. This slide is just some recent housing that I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with that we've completed recently in Parksville. So the 52 units of supportive housing at Orca Place, this is operated by the Island Crisis Care Society. 87 units of rental housing at Moyette. This is subsidized housing and market rental under the Community Housing Fund. And then the last option is 74 units of market rental housing at Sandscapes, and this was financed through BC Housing's Housing Hub.
This slide shows information from the 2023 point-in-time homeless count, as well as information about what is currently on BC Housing's registry. So as of September 30th, 2023, there's 135 residents in Parksville who are on the registry for support for subsidized housing. And so that is the independent living housing where rent is set at 30% of gross monthly. 37 residents are on the registry for supportive housing. And so those are individuals who require additional supports. So they've self-identified. And then there's some additional information here with respect to the demographics for the 103 homeless count for the point in time. As you can see, there's been an increase since 2021 by 18%, as well as 82% reported 2 or more health concerns and 75% experiencing homelessness for over a year. 94% have been in the community of Parksville for over a year as well.
Thanks. So how can communities get involved with BC Housing in planning for new housing? We've got a few bullets here talking about the various ways getting involved with municipal committees, supporting a local nonprofit in providing housing and understanding their needs, attending a public hearing. Just realized this slide is now outdated. And for nonprofits, forming a housing task force, starting to plan and respond to the BC Housing request for proposals, meeting with BC Housing and city staff to discuss ideas. And then for the municipality, obviously having an up-to-date housing needs assessment, offering land at nominal value to nonprofits or the province for the creation of affordable housing, waivers of fees to help keep the cost of developing affordable housing down, and expediting the process of rezonings, permitting, and construction, as well as advocating for yourselves with other senior levels of government, ministry, et cetera, to meet your housing needs.
This infographic emphasizes that it really does take a community to address homelessness. The health authority, provincial government, municipalities, community service providers, shelter operators, and impacted individuals, those with lived experience.
Thank you. Thank you for having us today, Mayor and Council. We're happy to answer any questions and talk about how we can work together in the future.
Thanks so much for your presentation, Jen and Sarah. Well done as usual. And just to express my appreciation for the jobs that you do. You have a very tough job. and you do it well. And so I understand the extreme pressures you're under. So well done. Thank you so much for what you do, because you make the difference in a lot of people's lives. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the collaboration you have exemplified over the years with the city of Parksville. We worked very well, formed a good relationship with BC Housing, and we've come a long way. And I also appreciate that relationship and collaboration. Just while it's on point of mind here is your PowerPoint that you had right now. You had a couple programs for different ones. I was trying to write them all down at the beginning, that you have so many, a couple I think that I was not even aware of. If you can make sure that we have a copy of that PowerPoint, it can be sent to our staff. Amanda's nodding yes, we'll have a copy of that so that we can refer to it back later when we're considering the different housing needs for our community. So thank you once again. I'm going to open up to the floor to our council, and Councillor Martin, go ahead.
The wrong one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good.
You might know about this, I'm sure you do, the Trunk Road, small tiny homes project. I believe there's a question I wondered. I understand BC Housing, and I don't know if you can tell me this, owns the property? Yes. And I see, I've got the article, it was in the paper, Times Colonist paper for January 4th, that this has been extended 2 more years. And so I don't know if you have a copy of that, but I have that, okay? My point is, I understand the Premier has mentioned that he thinks because I've seen him say this on the news, that we have more of 24-hour, like this 24-hour care rather than, 12 hours and then out on the street in the daytime. So I wondered if you know anything about that, if that's something that you're working towards, because it seems to make some sense in a lot of ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the provincial government's Belonging in BC strategy, there are a number of programs that are focused on homelessness and reducing homelessness. Included is the Heart and Hearth program. And so the Heart part is outreach work, including having dedicated resources internally at BC Housing who work with municipalities and service providers to do that outreach component that's connecting with folks who are currently in encampment to determine how and what support looks like to have folks come indoors. So there's that piece. The other is the Hearth part. That's more in the development services bailiwick, but that's really identifying and or building, in some cases, sheltering options for a longer term supportive housing stay, like a temporary stay. And that would be part of the housing ecosystem, with the idea being it would create some positive flow. So typically what it would look like is folks who are in encampment would move into shelter space, and folks who are currently in shelter where conversations have happened to determine their support level needs would then move into a Hearth site, a temporary site. For those conversations to occur, it's a conversation between ministry and municipality, and depending on how that conversation goes, it would be a partnership via a memorandum of understanding that BC Housing then would come in and deliver some of the components on. So with respect to the village in Duncan, that particular program, the funding has been extended for a number of years. Thankfully, the province is able to continue funding through the Heart and Hearth program. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate what you do, for sure. Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that we do have a permanent housing strategy for that property in Duncan as well, also concurrently underway.
The whole point of this is that we wouldn't expect that we would have homelessness forever. So if we can work towards the right situation for different citizens that their needs are different, we don't all fit into the box, right? And so I'm very thrilled that you're doing something. And I figured that that's why that land would be really good for supportive house, something like Orca Place or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the
Okay.
hope, that it's a step towards permanent housing there. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to the folks from BC Housing for appearing before the council. As you folks probably know, with inflation, cost of living being so high, the need for subsidized housing is ever rising. And your initiatives are very much appreciated where it, first of all, prevents people from going into homelessness. I want to come back to the Emergency Weather Response Program, EWR. Why is it only 12 hours to start with? Are you looking at perhaps extending this funding for beyond 12 hours? Because if we look at the current cold snap we had, yes, it was cold at night, but during the day, it was still -10, -12. So people to be kicked out after that, to out in the cold, to me, it's still extreme weather. So is there a plan to perhaps extend those beyond 12 hours depending on the weather?
Sorry, sir.
At this stage, Extreme Weather Program does have the funding for that time frame that you referenced. We're in the progress right now of taking a look at program overall to do a bit of an analysis on how things are going and absolutely sharing updates with our ministry as well on what that could look like. Additionally, there's, as you're aware, municipalities are able to access funding for warming centers through EMCR. That's Emergency Management and Climate Reduction. And so that's available as well. But I'm happy to take that feedback and question back to BC Housing for a more fulsome conversation. Thank you.
Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, I want to add my thanks for coming here today and in person. I'm very impressed with that. Thank you. I have so many questions. It's kind of hard to know where to start. I also did spend some time looking at the website, which I'll be honest, I found almost overwhelming. Although there are some guidelines, you know, if you're this sort of person or if you're a developer and so on, go here and there. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the housing hub and how that might be accessed by local developers or that partnership that could work on something there. I wonder if you could just talk about that first. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. The Housing Hub is a great tool for private developers who want to develop rental housing. It very much aligns with like a conventional mortgage, right? A conventional lender, but obviously offers much lower cost financing. And we see that lower cost financing transfer directly towards the affordability at the end. So it comes with strings in the form of a covenant on title that secures the affordability of the rental housing for a term of 10 years. And in that way, it encourages a developer to borrow the money through BC Housing, and then in turn, they develop affordable rental as opposed to renting it as high as the market dictates. They're restricted to a certain level.
Yeah.
Thank you. And a follow-up to that, I'm curious to know what kind of uptake there has been, you know, has there been a lot of interest in that program? The other question is, have you experienced with faith groups accessing that program or perhaps even a different program to do something on their own property where they have space available?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we've seen quite a few churches come to BC Housing with redevelopment plans for their large properties. Some of the partnerships we've worked on include the church redeveloping to a much smaller community chapel space with rental housing above or rental housing on the same property, and we found some success there. I mean, the Housing Hub financing is great because it's an open call. So they're continually taking applications. So where we've also seen success is when city staff who get a new rezoning for a rental building ask them, hey, have you asked BC Housing about their financing? And that's also kind of where we get some of our interest from developers who may not have heard that we offer financing for private developers.
Okay. Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to our delegation. Thank you so much for coming today. Really appreciate all the work you do. And my first question was about getting your presentation, which just was emailed to me, so that's great. there's the adage of what gets measured gets managed. And so I appreciate you providing some numbers on the need in our community. I was wondering if you could maybe speak to the boundaries of those needs, because we have a very interesting jurisdictional issue that is a challenge for many different things in this area, where we have the city of Parksville and regional districts areas in between, and then the town of Qualicum Beach. So a lot of coordination is needed to make things happen. So the numbers you've provided today, are those for the region, like Oceanside region, or are they specific to Parksville? That'd be my one question. And then can you speak, or do you have numbers to help us understand which direction we're going? Like, are we improving, or is there a greater need? So that we can know whether we're addressing that. And then finally, I'd be curious to know how we're doing relative to our peers, because I recognize that we are in a province that people are mobile. And so I wonder how our community is doing in terms of providing housing supports at a sort of per capita basis, rather relative to other communities. Is that something you can provide some more information on?
So other than the information that was in the slide regarding point in time, I don't have additional stats or numbers with me at the moment. However, I'm happy to take that back and have our folks internally liaise with city to sort of put that together and what that might look like. I'd be curious to know, though, typically when we're working with communities and municipalities, there's an understanding about their own point in time count.
Sorry, let me just clarify.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the point in time count.
Okay.
I'm talking about the registry for different kinds of housing, because I understand you have a registry of people who are looking to get into housing. And so I would want to know whether we're seeing that number going up year over year, or going down, or staying flat, and more maybe on a per capita basis as well, because we already our staff does keep numbers on what kind of units we're building,
Mhm.
but I don't personally have any insight into what the demand or need is for that. So that does help us at the council table when we're approving new kinds of housing to know what kind of units are also needed, because it's a fluid market, right? So there's a range of needs.
BC Housing can certainly take back, we can look at the stats that are coming out of our housing registry and perhaps do just thinking out loud when I say this, a year over year comparison, and to really unpack what is truly Parksville and what is the regional district to get a deeper understanding. We're happy to do that work. Additionally, what we've seen in other municipalities is the local service providers and outreach workers typically have quite a bit of demographic information, as well as sort of trends over time and where they're seeing some spikes in certain areas. And so there's an opportunity there as well for a deeper conversation. But I'll definitely take that back to ask our folks to do that year over year and get some more information that we can send on.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you. That'd be great. That would be super helpful. Because I'd also be curious, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit today, is recognizing that BC Housing is a provincial organization and that these challenges are provincial, but also national, but we've got to divide it somewhere. Can you maybe help us understand a little bit how BC Housing decides which communities to prioritize for providing various supports, and recognizing, of course, there's a huge range of need that you're looking to address within BC Housing?
Yeah, so also on the website, it's not easy to navigate, so I can always send a link to share, but we do also track where we're building supportive housing, where we're building community housing, Indigenous housing, other forms of housing. So there are resources on the website that show which communities are and which projects, so they're pinned on a map. But that's certainly a conversation that we have every time we do a request proposal. The current community housing fund proposal being a great example. We've received all of these RFPs, and part of that, scoring and evaluation is based on looking at the communities and where the need is, and where the applications have come from. So it's definitely something that we take into consideration. But I can send you a link. I'll share it with everyone on how to navigate to where the housing pins are located on Vancouver Island.
I just want to clarify my question. I I've seen where things are
Okay,
happening.
okay.
I'm curious about how you decide where to prioritize your limited resources.
I think it would depend on which specific housing fund we're talking about. So each one is obviously evaluated with a different metric depending on its, women transition housing versus community housing versus supportive housing and shelters. So, each one of them has its own criteria for where the need and demand is, and also equity. Where have we already developed? Where are there gaps? Yeah.
Any other first time comments from council? And we'll go back for second time around. Councillor Beal. Sean, no, you're okay. Sorry. Councillor Wood goes.
You read that.
Sorry, Mayor.
Thank you, Chair,
Yes.
and thank you to Sarah and Jennifer for presenting today. Appreciate it. It's nice to have a provincial ministry here that's in such dire need across the province and the country. One quick question I have is, from my limited understanding of a developer, when they go to start building something, it's easier for them to access financing from whoever their lender is, like a bank or something. And from my understanding, and this may not be true, but when a developer tries to build some non-market housing, is accessing financing as easy and as quick through BC Housing as it is for a developer who are under a bunch of different, they can't find labor and a bunch of other, kind of stresses in their industry? Is it as easy or close to as easy accessing the funding from BC Housing compared to whoever their regular financing is? Thank you.
In my opinion, I would say it's not more onerous or more difficult. There are more strings attached to our financing. Obviously, there's an affordability, there's a due diligence that needs to be done. We also offer reviews of their building to ensure, they've designed appropriately for affordable rental. As you know, strata and rental are completely different when it comes to longevity and finishes and those sorts of things. So I would say it's very similar, but yes, I acknowledge that there are, additional steps that they will have to go through when accessing BC housing financing.
No, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again, Jennifer and Sarah, for being here today. Picking up on a question raised by Councillor Martin earlier, referring to the Duncan village, the village that's set up in Duncan on Trunk Road. I do know that there has been some interest voiced by some local service providers in our community to look at that model. But when I look on your website, the BC Housing website, I don't see that example per se in the Heart and Hearth model. So I guess two parts. One, is that something that is possible to consider, or is that kind of a waste of time on the behalf of service providers? The other is it only when there is a sizable encampment that one can even work towards that? Like, I would hate to think that we would have to allow a situation to deteriorate to a point where it's just so obvious and onerous for us that it would be considered. So, we certainly have a number of people who are unhoused in the area. Well, and we have the numbers there as well in the area. But going back to, is that village model something that is possible to consider for local service providers or not? And again, does it have to wait until it's really quite significant before there's any application that can be made?
Yeah, thank you. We hear a lot about the village in every community we visit, and we understand that it's had a lot of success. I think one of the key points is that BC Housing currently doesn't view a single sleeping cabin with shared washroom facilities, et cetera, as a permanent housing solution. It's a step towards housing. So we're evaluating all types of housing, village type options as that transitional temporary housing option. But again, we really try to focus our resources on the permanent housing solutions. I don't know if you want to speak to the encampment, how that relates to it, but yeah, we appreciate that the village is operating well, and it's a great step towards housing, but it's certainly not a permanent housing solution.
Councillor Gore. Oh, sorry, January, oh, okay.
BC Housing is happy to join conversations at the community level as well regarding encampment response and persons who are experiencing homelessness. With respect to the Heart and Hearth program specifically, those are conversations that happen between ministry and municipality, with BC Housing coming in to do the delivery. And in our various conversations, we've had a number of communities express interest, and we're happy to take that interest back and let our executive and ministry know from there.
Hey, now Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I'm just going to paraphrase what Councillor Grenz was asking. We looked at all the initiatives of BC Housing in Parksville. Can you perhaps share something in the works for, let's say, Qualicum Beach, RDN? Because this needs a regional approach. Everybody needs to get on the table. I truly believe whether it's the homelessness numbers or people needing below market housing, I'm very certain that it's not just Parksville. We have movements back and forth. I have lived in Qualicum Beach myself and back in Parksville. So if you can share perhaps what other partnerships are you working on with the regions and the town of Qualicum Beach, please?
So opportunities that we have available right now include both the Community Housing Fund and the Indigenous Housing Fund, as well as the Women's Transition Housing Fund. So for the Community Housing Fund, we've just closed the request for proposal. And I understand there are submissions from this region included in that RFP, but we can't speak to that today yet. Similarly, with the Indigenous Housing Fund and the next round of Community Housing Fund, we're encouraging and welcoming nonprofits, nations, and municipalities to come to us with early stage proposals, a piece of land, for example, a partnership. And we're happy to provide pre-development funding to help folks advance their housing proposals for our next CHF, which we anticipate within the next 18 months or so. The Indigenous Housing Fund is now open, so we're also welcoming proposals from communities to provide their housing proposals to us for funding. The Women's Transition Housing Fund is also preparing to post a second follow-up request for proposals to communities who are interested in adding that type of housing to their communities. So I would say that largely we're asking our community partners to come to us and tell us what their needs are, and then we can provide you with the resources in the form of pre-development funding, advice, support, resources like development consultants or nonprofits in their areas.
And regarding the conversations about homelessness, we're happy, as I mentioned, to join any conversations with municipalities or regional districts. Just let us know.
Follow.
Separate question, but then I'll be done.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I did listen to a video that was shared by Councillor Wood, where the professor from SFU talked about the different initiatives towards they've taken up in downtown East Side, and he was presenting before the Nanaimo Council. One thing that he quite focused on was integrating the people back into the larger community rather than institutional setups, let's say like supportive housing or shelter spaces itself, because then people are not really moving away from the circle of friends or the influences that kind of keep them in that lifestyle. Is BC Housing looking at latest research to perhaps change the way we approach quote unquote solving homelessness or triaging people in a way where it's individual based, this is what you need. And also in the mind, we will think about integrating that individual back into the community. So there is no stigma. Let's say we have an Orca place, which is a huge success, but again, still an institution. We know this is supportive housing rather than, let's say, ideally have these folks spread out into the community and more integrated. Are you looking at something like this?
I can assure you our provincial leads at BC Housing for supportive housing and encampment response are having conversations on an ongoing basis to review program models and doing research and connecting with our ministry as well as other ministries, including across Canada for those conversations. And I'm happy to share the feedback with our provincial leads that if you'd like to have one of them come and speak to the larger issues provincially that are being reviewed, happy to do that as well. For the regional conversations, as we're looking to bring more supportive housing and shelter spaces into community through the various partnerships, we're happy to have conversations about what those look like. In some cases, we are connecting with Indigenous community to seek their guidance on what kind of, just based on recent conversations we've had, what kind of landscaping is appropriate and what kind of design features and, what's more welcoming and what could that look like to have more of a supportive and culturally inclusive environment. And so we're in those conversations frequently. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Martin, we're going to wind this up here.
Oh, I was just
Sorry-
gonna,
sorry, Sarah.
that's okay. I was just gonna add that we showed the slide with the housing continuum, and I think one of the key elements of moving residents from shelter to supportive, to subsidized rental, to market rental is the availability. So flooding the market, with affordable rental makes space for folks to move from subsidized rental into affordable rental. And the same for supportive to subsidized rental. So you really need the houses and the units available in order for folks to flow through that continuum.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a big subject, isn't it? Thank you again for being here. First of all, the 103 count, I'm on the homelessness task force here in Parksville, and it's for Oceanside, not just Parksville. This is a matter of interest. It's because I saw the results. I was involved with it when they first started to do it, and then I came back with the results. So it was this is what Councillor Gower he's talking about, because it's a region, it's Qualicum, Parksville, and RDM. So that's one thing. And also when I went to on the tour of the Trunk Road property in May, the washrooms were separate, which I thought was significant. I don't know if you knew that. It's very unique in that, and not that it's going to be permanent, but it's better than what we have. There were a bank of 3 for about 8 units, because there's about 34 units there. And they each had a key to go into the individual ones. There was 3 of them, and they had shower and washroom. So I thought that was significant for the transition of these people off the street into something that's better than what we have on the street, right? Yet it's not Orca Place yet, it's like this transition. So, and when they went to do this, there were 600 people on a petition against it before they opened it. And BC Housing got behind it, and that was very good. And you got the land and you did what you did. So I'm very grateful that at least something's working. That, it must be hard in your job because it's tough, to see some things don't work, some things work. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor, for the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You sneak in one more, Councillor Bill, and then I'm going to wind it up. Councillor Bill, you're the last one. Go ahead.
Just as an aside, we've only waited, let's see, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. It's 10 months since we were hoping, and I realize that there's been lots of stresses.
to
So
run the
things
meeting.
have built up a little bit. But anyway, I do want to commend you for everything that you put together and are able to offer. And a question that I have is, given the amount of change that seems to be coming forward from the provincial level regarding housing and how that's, and the pressures to produce more housing, are people who are putting in applications to you, are you able to respond to them in a reasonable, timely manner? Or how are you possibly managing with what's going on? I guess that's one question I have.
Lack of sleep? No. Yeah, so we're obviously always trying to work on our processes to make them less onerous. You know, one of the recent things that we're doing is, as I shared, we're welcoming pre-development funding applications from groups. So we're going to package everything up and do things in bundles, for example. So I don't think there's any one way that we can make it perfect, but we're definitely trying to, I guess, remove some of the barriers. The Indigenous Housing Fund, we've simplified the process significantly. So we're not asking for a 300-page detailed proposal. We're asking for a story and some key details. And yeah, those are just some of the examples that we're trying to work with communities on making applications simpler.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, going back to that model, and I agree wholeheartedly that adding additional types of housing really helps to move things along, and certainly offering housing that has a mix of both deeply subsidized, geared to income, as well as that low market does provide that mix. I'd just like to share that only a few months ago, I was speaking with the manager of Orchid Place, ICCS, and they were mentioning that they actually had people who were ready to move elsewhere, but there wasn't a space for them, or that where they'd made application, they weren't selected to go there. So that's a real need to move along with housing that's suitable for families, not simply 1 and 2 bedroom housing, but something that's suitable for families. So it's not, the concerns are not only with the unhoused population, but certainly people who are in housing that they cannot afford. They don't necessarily have adequate rent subsidies. And so there's a huge need across the spectrum.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Council, we have a delegation. We had 2 delegations. One is withdrawn. Our first delegation and only delegation will be from BC Assessment for an overview of the BC Assessment Program. Presentation by M. Butterfield and L. Kirkbride of BC Assessment to provide an overview of BC Assessment background and organization and brief comments on Parksville property markets over the past year. So the individuals from BC Assessment, if you could approach the podium. Well, there you are. There you are. Okay, now we can see you. Thank you. Thank you for appearing. You have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I will jump right in. Make sure everyone can see.
If I could ask right away, if you could lean into your microphone a little bit closer, that would be appreciative. Where the technology here isn't quite up to what it should be. If you could.
No problem. Is this better? Does this work better?
Yes, that's okay.
Perfect. So thank you, Mayor and Council, for inviting us to come here today. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that BC Assessment conducts its business on the traditional homelands of thousands of First Nations people across the province. Currently today, I'm calling in from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt Nations. Myself, I am Matt Butterfield. I am a Deputy Assessor for Vancouver Island, and with me today, I have Leighton Kirkbride, a Senior Appraiser on our team. Today, we're going to go through about who BC Assessment is. We'll talk about the valuation processes. We'll talk about classification and exemptions. We'll talk about the assessment cycle and key dates. We'll talk about the relationship between assessments and taxation. We'll go over the 2024 assessment roll review. We'll go a bit into the appeal process and about how local governments can collaborate with BC Assessment to ensure that we have an accurate assessment roll produced for local government. So about BC Assessment established in 1974 under the Assessment Act. BC Assessment is independent of both local government and the province. It was created to under a joint commission created created to establish an independent authority to fairly and independently value all property in the province. So what BC Assessment does is we value all real estate on an annual provincial assessment roll that provides the foundation for local and provincial taxing authorities to finance communities with billions of dollars in property tax revenue. So our service commitment to local government is we aim to be open and transparent. We aim to come to presentations like this to be able to explain the process and provide useful information about what we do and how we do it. We aim to be fair and accurate. We aim to be fair and accurate about what information we have, how property assessments are conducted, and how they are received by the market. We aim to be timely and accessible, both to the members of the public and to taxing authorities. We aim to be knowledgeable and respectful, to answer questions that are needed, to support issues in a knowledgeable and professional manner. And we do try to be innovative and collaborative. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today, is ways that we can collaborate with local government and taxing authorities to ensure that the assessment roll is as accurate and fair as possible. So what is the assessment roll? It is an annual list of properties, which represents 2.18 million properties across the province, a value of about 2.79 trillion. On the assessment roll, it identifies the ownership, value, classification, and exemption for each property. And what the assessment roll provided to local government does is provide a total value of each type of property within the community so that taxing authorities can set the local taxation rates to raise money for municipal services. So how do we value property? BC Assessment looks to establish market value as of July 1st each year. We look at the state and condition of the property as of October 31st. We use multiple different types of factors in determining what the value of a property is. We look at location, cost, replacement cost, revenue, wide varieties of factors to ensure that we have an accurate assessment of what market value would be for a property over the course of the last year. One of the questions we receive a lot is, why do we do market value? One, it's a basis of fairness. It's internationally recognized as one of the fairest systems for distributing property tax burden. And it's one of the more transparent ways of distributing property taxes. It's one of the ways people tend to understand better than other systems. And as part of our commitment to transparency, a lot of the information that we use in calculating the assessments we provide on our website, and that is the first stop for most people in looking at what's happening with the market and what's happening with individual properties. So different factors that affect market value that we look at: location, land use controls. So any change in land use controls by a municipality, that would be community plans, zoning, etc. All of that affect market value of property. We look at different land characteristics, waterfront, views, etc. We look at different building characteristics. What's the mix? Is there a commercial, industrial? Is it commercial, residential? And on certain types of property, we do look at what the income producing potential of the property is. That's how it trades when it hits the market. Basis to everything that we do is highest and best use. It's the foundation of what market value is, what's physically possible with a site, what's legally permissible on a site, what's the most financially feasible option, and then taking those three things into account, what's the maximal productivity of the site, so what's the highest value that's possible, given what's physically possible, legally permissible, and financially feasible. One of the areas that local governance can help us in determining highest and best use is ensuring that BC Assessment has the information required to determine any of these factors. So what's physically possible or what's there, we look at things like building permits to ensure that we have accurate building permit information. From a legally permissible perspective, that we understand what's happening with official community plans, what's happening with zoning or changes in zoning. So all of that gets tied into what's the highest and best use of a property. That gets tied into how do we provide the values for each property. So a bit more on that. Land use really does affect market value. That's seen across the board. And when there is rezonings, when community plans change, the marketability or the how things trade on the market changes. And what we do at BC Assessment is we look back over the course of the last year at what has been selling, what have things been selling for, and that is what gets reflected into the assessment roll. So changes that come from local governments do have a discernible effect on what market value is, and that's what we are striving to reflect. There are different ways of classifying properties. All of these have different taxation rates. Different properties can have more than one type of property class to it. Typically what you'll see is, in some mixed use developments, you'll see business and other class 6 mixed with residential class 1. And this is all depending on how is the property currently being used. Exemptions are another thing that are tied deeply with local government. There's two different types of exemptions. There's the permissive exemptions. These are exemptions that are passed and set by local taxing authorities like yourselves each year. These are things that we apply to the assessment roll. There are also statutory exemptions. These are things like provincially owned land or municipal owned land that is statutorily exempt from taxation. We would reflect that in the assessment roll as well. So the assessment cycle, right now we're in the first part of the assessment cycle. This is January 1st to 31st. We call this the inquiry period. This is a period of time where we aim to be transparent to the public. We open the phones and encourage the public to call and ask questions about their property assessment. Once the inquiry period is over, the appeal deadline is January 31st. That's to appeal to the Property Assessment Review Panel. The Property Assessment Review Panels sit every year from February 1st to March 31st, and they hear appeals at the regarding property assessments. If people are still not satisfied with their assessed value, they have the ability to appeal the property to the Property Assessment Appeals Board. The appeal deadline for that is April 30th. And over the course of the summer, April to September, BC Assessment is typically out in the field looking at what's happening in each community, what's happening with local construction, what's happening with the market, what's being sold, what are things being sold for. And we complete all these types of projects and inspections of new construction to start working on our roll production. That typically happens October 1st to December 31st in the year. We look at what's changed over the course of the past year, what sales have occurred in different markets, what are things selling for, and take all of that into account to set the roll. Some of the other key dates that we have, October 31st, this is where we say what is the current physical condition and permitted use of a property. So if a property is partially complete of construction, whatever that physical condition is of October 31st, that's what we'll set onto the roll. For ownership, so whatever's in the land title records as of November 30th, we'll reflect that ownership on the roll. And somewhere between December 1st and December 31st, the assessment notices then are produced and physical notices then are mailed out. And the goal is always to have physical mailed assessments out by the first week of January. And the cycle begins again. So what's the relationship between the assessment and taxation? BC Assessment, we provide the assessed value. Not only do we provide the complete value of the different property classes to a taxing authority in order to estimate and set tax rates. We also provide individual property assessments, how that's broken down for individual properties to each property owner within BC. So those values, that total or that value is multiplied by the property tax rate, which is set by the taxing authority yourselves, and that determines then what the property taxes payable are for individuals within the community. The question we get a lot is, what is the impact, or how does a change in assessment impact my taxes? And although BC assessment does not set the tax rates, there is an effect of an assessment on taxation. If a property's value changes lower than the average change for that property class, taxes are likely to decrease, taxing if the tax rate stays the same. If a property changes similar to the average change within a property class, taxes are not likely to change. And if the change is higher than the average, taxes are likely to increase. So again, we look back at what's been selling over the course of the previous year, and sometimes certain pockets, certain type of properties, are waterfront selling more than, say, your cabins. There can be a shift within the property class of what people are willing to pay for a certain type of property, and that is reflected then in the assessments, and that would have then an impact on taxes owing from an individual. An overview of the assessment roll. For the province, the assessment roll in total increased about 3% from 2023. The total value of the provincial roll now is 2.79 trillion. Non-market change, so this is new construction. This is value added or found within a municipality or a taxing authority that is not related to market. So new construction, subdivisions, things that weren't there from the previous year. That is up 18%. And the total value for the province of increase of new construction was around close to 40 billion. And for the province, about 88.5% of properties in the province are residential. And the total value of the residential roll is about $2.5 trillion. How does that reflect on Parksville's roll? Parksville's roll increased just about 1% from 2023 to a total value of 6.157 billion. Non-market change, so again, new construction projects, subdivisions, etc. There's an increase of non-market change of about 14% from last year. That is a total value of about 101 million non-market change dollars coming from a value of Parksville. And Parksville sees about 85% of its properties in Class 1 residential, and the total value of the residential roll is about 5.24 billion. How did things change from a market perspective over the last year? Single-family residential properties saw a nominal change from about -5 to 5%. Strata properties had a bit of a larger differential, about a shift of about -10 to +10, and commercial industrial saw about a 0 to 10% increase over the past year. So the appeal process, questions that might have from constituents are, if I have a question about my assessment that I received, what should I do? We do encourage everyone to go to the website first, bcassessment.ca, take a look at the information that's provided. As part of our commitment to transparency, we provide what are the neighboring properties assessed at, what are sample sold properties that went into the assessment, so that individuals can have some information at their fingertips of where the assessed value came from. If people still disagree with the assessed value, we encourage them to file or to give us a call first. We're happy to speak through what went into the assessment and answer any questions the public might have. And then up to January 31st, the property owners have the ability to file an appeal. Once an appeal has been filed, the property assessment review panel sits from February to mid-end of March. These review panels will conduct reviews via teleconference hearings where the property owner has the ability to explain why they think the assessment is incorrect. And then if there's still a disagreement in what the assessed value is or the results of the hearing, there's the second level appeal, that is the Property Assessment Appeal Board. And those sit after April 31st or April 30th. Typically what we've seen, Parksville's completed roll acceptance, this is the number of properties that are found under appeal, tends to mirror what the province does, and that's less than 2% of properties annually are found under appeal. And due to that, what is the effect on the roll from a stability perspective? There's typically a minimal change then to what happens with the roll year to year. 0.3% is the strongest change that we've seen from Parksville. And that typically hovers somewhere around 0% change year to year. So collaborating with local governments, there's many ways that we can work together to ensure that we have the most accurate assessment roll possible. A lot of it comes down to sharing information. The important things that we look at from sharing information, building permits are one of the key ones. Building permits, building plans, land use controls, development applications, any extensions of service infrastructure. So if water, sewer, et cetera, is getting extended out to certain properties, we'd love to know about this. Of course, any of the permissive revitalization tax exemptions that are passed by Parksville, we need to know about so we can reflect it on the roll. And any changes of occupiers or leases of civic properties. A lot of this can be done via the Citrix share file that we have set up between staff as a way of providing this information. The earlier we get copies of things, the easier it is for us to ensure that they're reflected in the roll. And as these components, as we work through the year, are the basis of municipal taxation, the earlier we know something, the earlier we can action it, the more accurate and fair the assessment roll can be for people who live in Parksville. Additional resources, again, we have a lot of information on the BC Assessment website. We have the interactive property trend maps. We have information about appeals, should people look or be looking into appealing the assessment. But mostly it's, we have the ability to plug in the address, take a look at what properties are being sold around your property, take a look at what neighboring properties are being assessed at. All part of our wish to be as transparent as possible. On our website is also the way to log in for yourselves and staff, where you can pull down the reports that we provide regarding total value per class, non-market change, etc. And we're always happy to work with you on understanding what those reports are and how to access the different information that we have available. Additional resources provided by the province. These are independent of BC Assessment. So the Property Assessment Review Panel and Appeals Board, the two levels of appeal, these are again independent bodies run by the province. So they have their own websites. The Homeowner Grant Program is again run by the province, but are additional resources for people who live in Parksville. And the Property Tax Deferral Program. All of these can be found on the BC government website. That's all we have from a formal presentation. We're very happy to answer any questions you may have regarding assessments, the cycle, etc.
Thank you so much for your presentation. A very timely presentation with the assessments just coming out in January. I know it's always an exciting time for a lot of people to check them all out. And it's a very, I commend you on your website. It's very user friendly and it's quite well used, I imagine. The only other comment I'd just like to make is a lot of the information for assessments as compared to property taxation is on the City of Parksville website. We have a lot of the key points from your slides that you just presented today. And so further information is on the website as far as local taxation as well. So any questions for the delegation from members of council? That would be Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Through yourself, I believe it's to Matthew. I have two questions, and one relates to a specific slide. I don't know if you wanted to bring your PowerPoint back up. It's the slide that just has kind of 6 boxes on it. If it's a pain, we don't have to do that.
Oh, we absolutely can. Which one? 6 boxes.
6 boxes.
Yeah, your property values change versus your property tax impact.
Yep. Hang on a second. I will share my screen again.
Thank you. Thanks for
This
going through the trouble, Matthew. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah. So, this is just maybe the way I look at the chart, but if a municipality is going to increase their taxes by, say, 20%, I don't like the way the chart says taxes likely decrease. I know that there's an asterisk, especially on your website. It says the diagram above and the scenarios below assume stable tax rates and no changes. Typically a municipality will increase the tax rate a little bit. And so, maybe they aim for a small percentage. I won't name any percentage, but taxes likely decrease and taxes likely increase. If I was a regular homeowner who didn't understand, we're just talking about your taxes relative to your neighbors or in that same property class. It just seems like I think the chart could be a little more clear for people who have a really hard time understanding when they get their assessment and it's lower than last year, they think their property taxes are going to go down. But all it is relative to, your neighbor or something like that. I think there's work that could be done on here. I'm not saying you guys are doing a bad job at all, and that's just the way I read it. Okay, I'm done ranting about that, Matthew. My second question, Matthew, is, and you might not know this, but what percentage of appeals are successful?
That is an answer I don't have with me, and of course it's going to change year to year, and also will change depending on what the property class is. And I don't have that number.
Okay, well, thank you anyways. I thought I'd
But
ask.
regarding your first question / comment, we do appreciate feedback, so we will take that into consideration. It's conveying the effect of an assessed value versus what the effect on taxation is something that we are always striving to do better and to be clearer about. It's something that every year is a question that comes up. Every year we're really working to make it better. So we do appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate your presentation, both of you. I was on the appeal board as a citizen for about 10, 12 years. And I found that the people will come with a small amount, like 25, 40,000. And it's such a small percentage that they would have saved for all the effort and time of the panel and the people. And they're nervous. And it just, I don't know if that can be something that you express, like if you're trying to come for 25 or 50,000 discrete, 40,000 discount, what would it make difference to your actual taxes? That relevancy, because I have a friend in Victoria who he's very, very professional. He had all his ducks in order. We went over it and he said, it was hardly worth my time for 70,000, And so I wanted to share that with you. I think it could be expressed more. It would save a lot of the panel's time and your time too. So, because it's just a work of waste of time. So thank you.
No, absolutely. And all of these concepts that are, I think for average everyday people, these are fairly abstract concepts, right? And market value, how value is occurred, the appeals process, it's either convoluted, it sits in the abstract. And so how we can better convey what the changes are, what the impact of those will be, and also what the impact of your time and energy might be in working through the system. We're always happy to have feedback and ideas to make it better. So thank you.
Councillor Grims?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to our delegation. I guess they say everything's relative, so maybe building on Councillor Wood, you could also explain the theory of relativity when you're doing the relative property tax changes. But my question is about the slide you had with regard to provincial property value changes and then Parksville's property value changes. And then later on, you had slides that on the same charted the province versus Parksville. I'd be curious to see what the province versus Parksville relative numbers are for increases in property tax as well as increases in like the new build.
So increases in new build, that's something that we can look and provide with the non-market change numbers. Well, that's, I can pull those up quickly for you. On the changes in taxation and taxation value, we don't typically chart that. And the reason we don't is we don't set those rates across the province, right? Each taxing authority sets them individually.
Sorry, it's the property value that I'd be interested in.
Gotcha. Okay. For the property value, of course, we can provide that information very quickly to Mayor and Council if you'd like.
That'd be great. And I have another unrelated question then, but yeah, if you're able to provide the relative numbers, that would be great. So we can have a sense of where we stand within the province in terms of our new build and understanding everything is relative, all this. So my other question is that we do have a property that is owned by the city and it doesn't show up on BC Assessment's website. Is that normal?
It can. Certain civic buildings that are owned and occupied by civic entities, we don't typically put on. It's not normally something that your average property owner will want to look at. And the reason I say that is, let's say you have, I'm just thinking from a commercial building perspective, you have a commercial building and a civic building next to each other. They theoretically might trade very differently on the market, and having the ease of explaining how the civic building is valued and how the civic building then would trade if it hypothetically would come onto the market is probably more of a convoluted task than just not having it show up on the website.
Follow up. Yeah, okay, because I did look through a few different properties that are owned by the city of Parksville, and also other municipalities, and see that some of those show up on the BC Assessment website with the property value, and found one in Parksville that does not. And so I think from the perspective of decision makers, it's helpful to know and also to include that property in the overall value within the community, but also to know the value of that property in terms of making decisions about, or even just explaining about the value being offered to the community by owning that property.
I hear you. We can also make sure we have a list of civic owned properties we can provide you as well, should that help.
Okay, so then we maybe have two homework items that I'd love to touch base on, which is the first one, and then also maybe we can correspond on the second one as well. Thank you very much.
Happy to.
Thank you. Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. If you folks can tell me, how is BC Assessment funded? I understand a portion of our property taxes go towards BC Assessment. And the reason I'm asking is, and I know assessment is, a lot of it is market driven, just to make sure the property assessments, what we are getting are transparent and fair. So if you can speak to your funding, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So BC Assessment is funded as a portion of the assessment or taxable value does come to BC Assessment. That is the funding. So we don't typically receive additional funding from the province. But our standard operating budgets have been pretty stable over the past couple of years. So we do have that information, I believe, is also publicly shared on our website, and I can double check that.
Any other questions? None? Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presentation. I think we've cleared all the questions. You have a couple homework items and yeah, we expect them by the end of the week. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, moving on now, we have a piece of correspondence. There are two pieces of correspondence on the agenda. First being from the Regional District of Nanaimo regarding the Parksville Pool of Feasibility Service Establishment Bylaw, number 1894.2023. Mover and seconder for the recommendations. Moved by Councillor Gore, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you. We have another piece of correspondence from the Access Oceanside Association, Public Works Capital Budget Planning Process, the sidewalk and accessibility improvements. Mover and seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Beal. Any discussion? Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to thank staff for taking the time in responding to AOA's request about where that money was spent, about $40,000 for the sidewalk and accessibility improvement. And I recognize that our CAO is on leave today, but I was wondering if somebody from the staff would be able to answer if sidewalk inspections that were undertaken outside the downtown core, that's in the last couple of years.
I think we could probably, would be someone that's not here as well, Councillor Gore. I think what we'd do is we'd put that question out to staff now. If we could just record that question and get the information back for Councillor Gore. Thank you. Any further comments on this correspondence? All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you. The first report on the agenda is, sorry. Hi. Okay, so I've been requested for a comfort break at this time. If we can have a comfort break, it's 2:22, reconvene back at 2:30, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. We have the first report on the agenda is from the Director of Community Planning and Building, the follow-up report, development variance and development permit application to consider issuance of a development variance permit and development permit. First off, is anyone presenting on this one, or is it strictly as per the attached? For the attached? Yes, okay, that's fine. Everyone has that in front of them as background information. Is there anyone in the gallery who wishes to provide comment to council on the proposed development variance permit application? Nobody online come through? Thank you. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation as follows into the agenda? Mover and a seconder, moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Beal. Any comments or discussion? Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, I would like to ask our Director of Planning a couple of questions that were raised by community members. If Mr. Russell can speak to the setbacks, especially on the east-west lane relaxation that the member has asked. And perhaps if this precedent is followed by the property right adjacent to the lane on the north side, would that in future could potentially affect our ability to provide municipal services or fire response?
Mr. Russell, I see you're online and present. Are you clear of the question?
Not 100% clear, but I will do my best. So I understand that Council Gore is raising a concern with respect to the setback relaxation to the east-west lane. Is that correct?
Correct. Thank you.
So that's the east-west traveling lane, which is located at the north end of the property, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, there are 3 or 4 parking spaces that to a member of the public would actually appear that they are part of the lane, but they are in fact not part of the lane. They are located on the private property. So in this case, essentially the variance will be recognizing the existing parking layout where there's some lane side parking that just happen to be located on private property that are 0 meter, because they're part of the same paved surface, they're 0 meters away from that property boundary.
You and the second part of the question.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor. I have a question about the loading zone relaxation. So if we are to let them not have a loading zone on site, what's the most appropriate location they probably be using? Would it be the lanes or the McCarter Street? For loading purposes.
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Gore, typically in a scenario like that, someone would put some orange pylons, traffic cones down temporarily to use the space to unload it. And they're gonna, depending on which business, there's a couple commercial units in here. So depending on what unit is closest to, will probably determine what place they would use for, typically 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so. So I think it's really going to depend on what's being delivered into what commercial unit in the building, what parking spaces would be temporarily occupied.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Russell, what happens when people are moving in and out of the building? Because it's a rental building. And so did they do the same thing, put the cones on the road?
If I may, through the mayor, through to Councillor Martin, that would be the situation, yes. And I can speak from personal experience in Nanaimo using a U-Haul trailer outside of a rental apartment building, parking on a lane, doing just that very thing.
Councillor Martin, follow up.
Also, there was this green escape and the kinds of a suggestion of having more green. I've had, letters from citizens about having more grass. And I personally think that we need to have more sensitive, less water usage and sort of desert looking type landscaping. That to me, I didn't think the grass, because we're concerned about maintenance costs and also about water. So there you go. That was just my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to our Director of Community Planning and Building. Thank you for the clarification on loading zone with a real live example. But my question is around a little bit more high level. This is a rental building, which is great to see some more rentals coming into the community. Can you speak a little bit to how it is determined what the mix of 1 to 2 bedrooms would be in this sort of situation? And I know this one doesn't have any 3 bedrooms, which is always nice to have a little bit more available out there for larger families or for families, period. But maybe you can help me understand a little bit the process around determining what the mix of rental size units is. Thanks.
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Grenz. It really is outside of the purview of these proceedings, to be honest. The what's before council is the form and character of the building, which is really the aesthetic appearance of the building. And these variances are to facilitate the envelope of the building, but it's really outside of municipal control, the specific floor layout that a particular builder is deciding to develop their private property to. So they would base it on what they believe their market is, and develop the property accordingly. Now, this might be different if this was a rezoning application where someone was seeking a massive uplift in land value, and as part of that negotiation, a city may weigh into the composition, more specifically as part of a formal housing agreement. But in this case, that's not the case here.
Thank you. Follow up.
Thank you. Yeah, I was not much specifically to this building. It just comes to my mind as we look at this particular building, but I'm curious what the process is. So just generally, this is governed mainly by market forces and what the developer would think is going to be something that is needed by the marketplace.
If I may, Mayor, to Councillor Grenz, yes, that would be my understanding.
Thank you. Any further questions? I think we've moved this. Have we not moved this already? Yes, we have. Okay. All those in favor? Those opposed? That carries with Councillor Fries opposing. Thank you. We have next is another one for planning. The next report from the Director of Community Planning and Building is a development variance permit application at 170 Stanford Avenue East to consider proceeding with a notice for a development variance permit. Do I have a mover or a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Discussion. All those in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. The next report from the director, no, we have that one removed. Let's move on to the next one. The next report is from the Emergency Program Coordinator regarding the 2024 UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund ESS grant application to seek council approval for the town of Colquhoun Beach to apply on behalf of EMO, Emergency Management, Oceanside, and the City of Parksville for regional grant funding for emergency support services, supplies, training, and equipment. Do I have a mover and a second for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Gore, seconded by Councillor Beal. Is there any discussion or comments? All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you. Yes. Yes, the bride. The next report is regarding the Manager of Administrative Services for the 2024 Chamber of Commerce Fee for Service to renew the Chamber of Commerce Fee for Service agreement as per enclosed. Do I have a mover or seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wood. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you. The next report is the Director of Finance for 2024 to 2028 Financial Plan, Water and Sewer Funds, a presentation by Ms. Holmes regarding the 2024-2028 Financial Plan, Water and Sewer Funds issue. Here we have Ms. Holmes, welcome.
Good afternoon. Okay, this is following up on our previous financial planning meetings that we've had for 2024 to 2028. Today, we're going to look at sewer and water funds. And the next meeting will be the general fund and the remaining departments within the city. So just to review what will be included today, and that is, it's a first draft. It's of the core budget, which is essentially the same service levels as the prior year, just at current costing. It doesn't reflect any new spending proposals or anything like that that we might receive direction from council on. We do know that we're doing a lot of work with respect to our capital assets, things like our master plans, asset management planning, some valuations and some assessments. And so we're still very much in that process. So with respect to the capital plans, you'll see in today's presentation that we're really just carrying forward what was in the plan last year, and there's been very few changes in that. And in fact, the kind of significant infrastructure upgrade project isn't identified yet because we're waiting on that information to really be able to assess what's the most important and highest risk. And so we'll bring that information to council as you receive the presentations on master plans and things like that. But we will continue with financial plans that include that funding envelope that council has approved in each year going out for the 5 years. And so it's basically a placeholder with more information to come about specific projects. So you'll see that today as well. One thing I will note is that your significant strategic project in terms of the drinking water master plan, I'll remind you that that lives in the general fund because it's kind of a corporate citywide project. It doesn't live in the water fund, so we won't be talking about that today. And then just a couple of assumptions with respect to costs. We are seeing inflation numbers are coming down a little bit. What we aren't seeing is costs going back to what they were pre-pandemic. As might be expected, they just kind of hover where they got to, and we haven't seen significant decreases. So as much as the last couple of financial plans have shown quite significant increases, those aren't coming back down because the inflation's gone down. The prices just aren't increasing incrementally. The other thing is we've got assumptions in here with respect to collective agreement increases or changes, which at this point are still under negotiation. And so we've made a best guess at this point, but there may be further adjustments once we know that number. And finally, there are numbers in here with respect to 2023 forecast numbers. We're still very much receiving invoices for the year-end, finalizing projects, year-end journal entries and audit. And so again, those numbers are preliminary and here for comparative purposes for your decision-making, but they're also subject to change and it's the best guess at this point. Okay. So with all of that, we'll get into some details here then. Just to remind you, we're into kind of the detail parts of the financial plan, which is this meeting and next week with departmental presentations of specific financial plans. On January the 29th, we'll bring all of council's resolutions from committee of the whole and any other direction you give at meetings to one meeting on the 29th, at which time we'll look for any direction that you're able to make at that point. February 12th will be kind of bring it all together for you and look for some decisions on early rate setting and property tax increases. And then we'll revisit this again in April when we set our property tax rates and have the final assessment. So it was good to hear from BC Assessment today, and I hope that you all have a little bit more information about their processes. So today we're calling this a provisional plan. The one in April will be called an amended plan in order to set the bylaws for water and sewer rates and tax rates in late April, early May. So just to review, today is a core plan, same services, updated rates. If council wants to give direction on any changes to service levels or improvements or changes to the plan, then that would be at your direction that we would include those things. We wouldn't go ahead and include those at this point. This is just the core financial plan. So looking at utilities today, we know that these are a couple of the really core services that our residents are looking for. They want to make sure they can turn on the tap and the water comes out and that they can still flush the toilet. And we've seen over the last couple of years in BC, a few communities that haven't had that be the case. So we as staff are looking at that asset management planning piece so that we can ensure that our capital assets can continue to provide those service levels to our residents. In terms of activity levels, we've got our finance department issues the semi-annual utility bills. So that just looks at kind of how many we're issuing in a year. What we know for water and sewer this year is there's about 233 new accounts, and that's reflective of all of these buildings that are going up essentially in our downtown core. And so it has been quite a busy year, both for finance and our utility staff, in terms of getting those accounts set up and water meters in and things like that. So the number of utility bills issued is one measure of that, but also how many different water meters we have to read and things like that. So we get some increases just by that level of growth within the community. Our going out a number of years assumes quite a low level of growth. And so when we're getting significant numbers like this, it's quite a positive impact on the revenue number. But we also need to remember that there is costs associated with that increased activity. We'll first look at sewer. And some of the kind of cost categories that we look at for sewers administration, the cost of the collection system, lift stations, the treatment and disposal, which is provided by the RDN by contract through the Northern Communities Wastewater Treatment Center, and that's in French Creek. And then we've got infrastructure costs related to our tangible capital assets. Like last year, I like to provide you this analysis, which looks at the proposed bylaw, but looking at what costs are our ongoing or recurring costs and what are non-recurring costs. And further to our discussions when we were talking about the new possible reserves policy is looking at those non-recurring costs and how we're funding those. And are we able to fund it out of excess user fees or other kind of non-recurring forms of funding, whether that's grants or reserves or things like that. And so it's important to look at that kind of recurring or ongoing cost column to make sure that our fees are covering those basic costs related to the utility. Because as you know, the utilities are funded based on fees rather than property taxes. And so when we're setting the rates related to water and sewer, we want to make sure that those user fees are sufficient to cover our basic operating and administrative costs. And so what you'll see there is a positive contribution in the ongoing or recurring net income from operations to contribute towards special projects and capital. We'll dive into each of these categories specifically in terms of why things are up or down, but what you will note is that the most significant increase on the cost side is with our treatment and disposal RDN contract. And we have been forecasting out with pretty significant assumptions, but it was a little higher than what we expected in the 23 to 27 financial plan. And their increases are about 10 or 11%. I know that they're doing significant capital costs and building out there, and a lot of that is covered by DCCs. And so this is net of those costs. So it really is a significant cost. And we continue to include that cost as provided by the RDN. This is just the second part of the bylaw and looking at the kind of non-operating amounts, which is our capital, our transfers to and from reserves and amortization. And so I think that bottom line looks good where we're essentially have a small positive contribution from ongoing costs and a small negative from the non-recurring, and we can dig into that a little bit. Okay, on the revenue side, last year in the 23 to 27 financial plan, we assumed a 3% increase in rates across the 5 years, and I've continued to leave that assumption in there. A 3% rate equates to about $6 per year for an average household. And so our typical minimum charge for an average household is about $217 currently. increase that by $6 would be about $223 in a year. You can see that our user fees last year, if you recall, we made some assumptions just given the water restrictions that were early in the year that perhaps that water consumption would cut back. The sewer rates and billing is based on water consumption. We were expecting more of a drop in sewer. What we'll see, and we'll look at it closer in water, is that that didn't happen on the water consumption. And so in both sewer and water, we were above budget on our revenues. The 3% rate increase also is applied to our parcel tax, and that's for properties that haven't got improvements on it yet, but have the ability to connect to sewer. So they pay parcel tax. So that varies depending on the number of parcels. What we've seen is some parcels have been taken out and now have development on them. So then they pay the regular fees rather than the parcel tax. And finally, we have revenue that we collect related to that RDN levy through property taxes. It's not completely collected through fees. And so that's the additional amount there. Any questions on those proposed revenues at this point? This is just showing the costs related to the treatment and disposal provided by the RDN. The requisition for 2023 is about 3.5 million, up from 3.1 million last year. The cost is allocated to the various participants of that based on proportionate flows of the participants in that service. And so Parksville receives that amount. Our share of that is quite consistent over the last number of years, but you can see where that cost is going. And I've put it in the chart out to 2028, and we'll be over $5 million on this by the end of this financial plan. So it is a significant amount of money. And so looking out, we probably will be increasing our sewer rates more over the next number of years as that facility gets built out. This just shows the proportionate shares of those that participate in that function, with Parksville being about 48%. Last year we were 47.55. This year we're 47.49. And so that's quite consistent, as well as the participants are the same. And just looking year over year, they're all very, very similar. Into the operating expenditures for sanitary sewer, you can see there's very little change year over year. Staff has tried to really move dollars around rather than look for increases. So if something is below budget, we're maybe moving it where things have increased. So it's not that costs haven't changed. We're just trying to be prudent with the budgets and move things around as we see fit. However, there are some changes in our administration with respect to the allocation of staff. What we do is we look at actual activities in a year and look ahead at the work plan for coming years and adjust the sharing of the utilities management and supervisory staff. And so what we have is we've cut back a little bit on management and supervisory in sewer and a little more in water. And so that's been offset by increases in other areas. And so I just want to kind of clarify that this doesn't mean there aren't changes in the costs. We're just trying to be prudent. Looking at minor capital or special projects, again, as I mentioned, it's pretty similar to what was in the 23 to 27 financial plan, and that we've just tweaked those amounts, as well as identified projects that were in process at the end of the year and carried those forward for completion in typically the first quarter of this year. For example, the sewer master plan is nearing completion, and we've got a small amount of $43,000 remaining in 2024, and council can expect to receive a report on that soon. As well, continuing to budget for contingency amounts as we went through last year, where we're only budgeting for 1 year if it's spent, but otherwise we'll just carry those funds forward if they're unspent. So we're not taxing for those contingency amounts every year. And so those are the amounts that are still subject to finalization with our year end. And we'll tweak those amounts in your next version of this. But for now, we're following that same principle in terms of budgeting for that. The first year of the video inspection program that is shared between sanitary sewer and storm has been completed, and that's a 10-year plan. and at $50,000 per year. So that first iteration is complete now. Typically, municipalities will have a portion of their piping that they video inspect every year. And so this would be a continuing item, but it's been interesting to see kind of some of those works, whether it was what engineering expected or wasn't what they expected, and making changes to the capital plan related to that, or perhaps moving things up that maybe the quality isn't what they expected to have. And so we'll continue with that and be bringing council information with respect to capital and maintenance programs as we receive that information each year. Okay, into capital, as I mentioned, you'll see there that we've got the capital funding envelope of $375,000 identified in the infrastructure there. The project hasn't been identified for this year pending the receipt of some of that information. However, there is a small amount that is still to be complete on Moss. It's essentially complete. People are driving on it and using it, but there's always the last little bits that engineering needs to finish up. And so you'll see $30,000 in 2024 still related to Moss. And if you recall, last year in the financial plan was this instrumentation and controls renewal, and that's impacting water and sewer both. It's a total of about $500,000 over 5 years and funded by gas tax. And so you'll see in 2026 is the first year that there's going to be work done in sewer. Other than that, it's pretty wide open pending the receipt of the master plan on this. What I will note for you, and as we move forward in terms of looking at reserve contributions and our asset management planning, council has approved a $4 million funding envelope that's allocated out to our 4 infrastructure areas. It's not inflation adjusted. And so you can imagine that over time, we'll have less buying power with those amounts. So right now in the financial plan, they're shown without inflation adjustments. And so as we move forward with looking at kind of approving contributions to reserves, we might want to consider having those inflation adjusted just to maintain that same kind of purchasing power each year. As other costs are going up, we have inflation adjusted other costs within the financial plan, but you'll notice that the capital ones aren't adjusted that way. For sewer, we had proposed within the reserves policy 2 different capital reserves. One would be the infrastructure renewal where this 375 would go. We might want to also consider having kind of the other capital, which would be other special projects that might be capital related, or perhaps equipment that is significant, or controls like we have here, or perhaps those get included within one reserve. But I think as we discussed with the policy, what it can provide for council is some decision-making power around other new assets. Not that there's shiny, fun new sewer assets typically, but in some areas where we're not just renewing current infrastructure, we're actually introducing new infrastructure, and we might split the capital reserves up that way. So just something to think about for you. The capital fund was estimated to be about $1.3 million at the end of 23. That would be maintained with the current financial plan over the 5 years plus some interest. We are seeing interest rates coming down, but it's still, we are earning good interest as compared to say 5 years ago now. Any questions on any of that? Okay, and just to summarize with respect to reserve transfers that are included in the financial plan is we have our $375,000 per year that goes into the capital reserve, and then we pull that back out as needed for infrastructure projects. If an infrastructure project, say Moss, came in at $350,000 for the year, that $25,000 just remains in the reserve and could be used to top up something that goes over another year, or just continues to grow that reserve, and we build up some more resiliency financially within our reserves. There is still small carry forward amounts coming forward, and so you'll see that we have some in 2024, $73,000 coming out of our carry forward reserve to fund either minor capital or capital projects. We do have one project in sewer that the instrumentation project, $75,000 out of gas tax in 2026. This is right now where we see the bylaw sitting and the amounts to be coming in or out of unrestricted surplus aren't that significant with a small cash deficit plan for 2024. Okay, onto the water fund unless anyone's got questions about sanitary sewer. Okay. So our water utility, as you know, includes our joint ventures that we have with the ERWS and AWS. And this financial plan includes the amounts of our share from AWS and ERWS. Their financial plan was approved in November. And so those amounts, our share, have been picked up and reflected in the water fund here. And we'll look at minor capital and capital for water as well as the direct operating costs. We've got our water treatment plant is one of the most significant costs when you look at the water fund. And so we'll take a look at the capital and operating related to that as well. In terms of water production and consumption from the water treatment plant, these are updated stats that we provide each year where the, in terms of consumption by the city of Parksville, about 71% of that came from the water treatment plant water and about 29% from wells. And in terms of proportion of water treatment plant that is used by Parksville and our partner, the regional district, about 73.3% is Parksville and about 26.7% is the regional district. Those proportions in both measures are very consistent year over year. What I will note is that our staff do also track those proportions kind of by month during the year. And so in any one month, Parksville's share might range from 68% to 79%, but averages out at about 73% for the year. So there are, they keep very good statistics on this and watch for anomalies on that, as well as it informs various discussions between us and our partners in the joint ventures. Okay, looking at the water fund kind of overall, and again, showing you that split between what are ongoing costs and what are non-recurring costs so that we can understand kind of how we can set rates to best finance those activities. And so you'll see that there isn't significant change year over year in many of the costs. We do have an increase in revenue year over year because, as I noted, last year we were very conservative in our estimates for our water revenue. I really felt that because of the early restrictions on water that it would be significantly below the prior year, and it was not. You'll see that the actuals came in at nearly 3.9 million, and we had budgeted 3.6 on revenue. So I've thrown out that assumption this year, and we'll see what happens with our users this year with respect to water. We also have new accounts that get added into that forecast as well. And so you'll see that the revenue as compared to last year's financial plan has an increase of about $500,000 over kind of what we're forecasting. It's only about $250,000 over the actual forecast for 2023. And so it is a bit of a shot in the dark to some degree. There's so many factors that determine this. And once we've received the water master plan, we may look at different ways of billing for our water, including having a larger kind of fixed amount to ensure that we're covering our base costs, especially our infrastructure and operating costs, and less on the variable. But they will give us some recommendations with respect to that, and they do look at our rates that way. I think what we want to do as we're moving through this period of climate change is to make sure that we're staying resilient to that financially, and that we can ensure that we are renewing our infrastructure appropriately and continue to provide a high quality service to our residents in this area. Okay, looking at that this year, in the financial plan is about 1.7 million in capital expenditures, which you'll see is a significant amount of the capital expenditures relate to ERWS, and I'll go through those when we get to that. But continuing to make transfers to reserves, but related to those significant capital projects, pulling quite a lot out of reserves as well. And so we'll look at whether or not we need to address how much we're transferring or perhaps using some of the grant funding that we have available towards some of these projects. Looking at the revenue, continuing to show a 5% increase, which was the assumption in last year's financial plan, which results in about a $15 increase, a little over $1 per month to our average users. So the average water bill would be $320 a year, with that increase factored in. That increase gets applied as of April 1 and is the next 2 cycles after that. And so looking at a total water revenue of about 4.2 million as compared to about 3.7 last year. Other revenues that we have in the water fund are internal. We have a transfer from the fire department because our water staff maintains and looks after the hydrants that the fire department uses. And so we bill based on actual costs for that, as well as we have a transfer from the sewer fund, which shares in some of the administrative costs related to the billing. We have DCCs that are used to fund the long-term debt payments related to the ERWS. And so that's an annual amount, no change, as well as some of the expenditures in the water fund are eligible for DCC funding, most specifically in this case at the ERWS. And so there's some additional DCC funding related to that. On the expenditure side, you can see that's a little bit of an increase in administration, and that really relates into looking at the sharing of our management and supervisory staff with respect to the work plan and utilities. And so we've got some increased allocations there. You may recall that last year's financial plan included a significant increase in transmission and distribution related to a water meter replacement program. And so over about 5 years, we've got $150,000 a year, and this is the first year where we're seeing that increase. And so you'll note that's the significant increase there. And again, that's something that's been coming as a kind of standard maintenance project, is to replace those. So we're trying to do them in bulk to some degree to get some efficiencies there in costs. And so staff are working on that program throughout the year. What it did help is last year with council's approval of that, we can order early and get started early in the year and make sure that that project gets done. So it actually gets ordered in the fall for delivery early in the year, and they can get started on that and make sure we're getting those completed in a year. On our joint venture costs, you'll see here the operating costs don't show significant change. Where we'll see it is the minor capital and the capital. But just as a reminder, Parksville picks up about 64% of the costs of AWS and about 74% of ERWS. And that is the agreements change a little bit based on whether it's operating costs or capital costs, but that's essentially the nut of it. We have showing you what our share of operating costs are, as well as both joint ventures are making reserve contributions towards renewal of assets in the joint ventures. And so those reserve contributions have increased over the last couple of years. And as you know, the water treatment plant, although relatively new, will eventually need to be replaced and or expanded. And so starting to get some money put aside for that eventuality. Again, a reminder that these plans were approved November 9th, and so we're picking up the share in our water fund. With respect to water minor capital projects, again, mostly reflecting what was in last year's financial plan, as well as picking up projects that weren't completed in 2023 and showing the amounts to complete them in 2024. That includes finishing off the water master plan. There was some other work done by our operations staff that's noted there. The groundwater study was completed, and I expect will be incorporated into, again, our capital and minor capital projects for our learnings from that. The community park project contingency of 50,000 was included last year. And as you may recall from an earlier financial plan meeting, we're looking to council for direction on whether or not we put any of the unspent funds from that contingency back into reserve or whether we finish off some of the scope limitations within the community parks project. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that on the 24th with respect to parks. We have a couple of contingency amounts in here for works adjacent to development and for wells and pumps replacements as they may come up. And so we'll bring you final costs on that. But at this point, I'm carrying those funds forward and they wouldn't be taxed again this year.
Sorry. Councilor Gordon.
Thank you. Could you speak to the groundwater study a little bit more? This is the first time I'm hearing about this, and I'm sorry if I missed this. If you can tell us what this was about and what are some of the findings, if you're able to share right now?
Through the mayor, short answer is I don't have a lot of information about it. Yeah, it's been a project that's been going on for a couple of years. And I think we'd have to just get our operations or utility staff to respond to you and provide some information about that because I don't actually know that information. And they're both away today.
We'll get that information back to you.
My apologies about that.
Thank you.
Anything else on that?
Carry on.
Okay, with respect to the ERWS minor capital, you can see there, just wanted to provide a little bit of what that is it is, there's a chemical room audit being done at the plant, reviewing some possible design deficiencies as well as replacing a chemical tank and looking at our containment area around chemicals. And so that's our share of that in minor capital there. The water master plan, I would expect council should be receiving Q1 or Q2 of 2024. And again, that's going to be a part of all of the water studies that we're doing. And so there's a lot of information coming to council about water, including the drinking water master plan as well. Looking at water capital projects, again, these were all in last year's financial plan with the exception of the ERWS. You'll see a couple of those items that I mentioned are in capital versus minor capital. And so there's some significant amounts there. What you'll also notice in 2025 to 2028 is there is about $2.4 million per year related to water treatment plant potential upgrades. These are amounts that at this point aren't known in the ERWS. This year, there's a number of studies being done as well as, for example, a chemical room audit and some other works around plant design and other areas. What we want to do is to acknowledge that we expect those amounts to result in some significant upgrades to the water treatment plant. At the same time, we don't know what those amounts are. And so I don't, on the one hand, want to skew the financial plan by showing amounts that are unfounded. At the same time, it also doesn't make sense to show zero. And so what the financial plan reflects right now is that those amounts are in there so that we're looking at them and knowing that they're possibly coming. The amounts will be amended once we have further information. But on the funding side, what you'll see is that I'm assuming, and this is what ERWS assumed, that half would be funded by some sort of infrastructure grant. And so when the water treatment plant was constructed, I think we had about 73.3% of senior government funding for a lot of the construction. So we're hoping that maybe we would get 50% funding towards any upgrades that were required. There is a lot of infrastructure funding available right now. And so I think it's not an assumption that's way out there. What I've also assumed for then the other half of that, of Parksville's share, would be that we would likely borrow that. Our reserves at this point wouldn't support that level of expenditure unless we really increased rates or made some different changes at council's direction. However, I would suggest to you that we likely could borrow internally from other reserves that are very healthy because say, for example, the roads reserve has significant amounts in DCCs. And so we may be able to borrow internally and not have to go to an external process to do that. And so as that information comes to us, I'll bring those suggestions to you, but for now, I think it's a safe assumption, again, to assume that we'd have some level of borrowing, or perhaps we would borrow some of it internally and then go through some sort of process to borrow from MFA. What that does, though, is it kind of nets to zero in terms of impact to the user fees within our financial plan right now. This is starting next year, so it's not way off in the future, but I'm hoping that within 6 to 8 months that we'll have more information that will inform at least the magnitude of that. Right now, there's about $13.3 million over the 5 years reflected in Parksville's financial plan. And so, again, hoping that those assumptions make sense to you and that they're fair, while still showing that we expect there to be some expenditures there.
Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. And I really respect your financial acumen and presenting all these numbers and the possibilities of internal borrowing for this likely huge expenditure that we'll be facing. So just a point of clarification, the 13 million is only Parksville's share or the total expense of doing the repairs on the water treatment plant?
Through the mayor, that's Parksville's share, the 74%. So I think it's about 18 million total or something like that. That is a really rough number that we've have from a consultant at this point. But again, I'm really trying to be very conservative in our estimates here and make sure that council understands it may be significant. We're hoping it's less. We're also hoping, and we can go through in the minor capital, we have an amount that is basically, if there are smaller fixes that can be done in the current year without making it part of the larger project, we're trying to kind of get those done internally rather than having to go outside for some of those as well. So staff is working hard at trying to address those within their capabilities as well, just to keep the costs. But we do know that there will be some significant projects.
Thank you. Follow up, Councillor Gore.
So thank you. Is it possible to, and you probably have explored this option of perhaps using the grant money, like the growing communities, or from the provincial government that we just did get? Is it possible to use that money towards something like this?
Yeah, through the mayor. Yes, a lot of the water and other infrastructure works are definitely part of, gas tax and growing communities fund. Yeah. And what I
Good
will
question.
say is wherever we have possibilities to use grant funds and can leave our reserve funds to be growing and earning interest, that's better, right? Use that other funding for these non-recurring and be trying to put those monies aside for what we know is our own infrastructure renewal that's coming.
Thank you. Carry on.
Okay, I just want to make sure I've gone through. Like sewer, we're waiting on the water master plan, the drinking water master plan, and a lot of this valuation and assessment work to determine what the infrastructure projects will be. And engineering is kind of synthesizing all of that information. So you'll see on that infrastructure projects, we've just got $450,000 identified each year so that we're showing that something will get done. At this point, you'll receive more information as that information comes together. Engineering, however, does have a few different projects that are ready to go. It's just they want to make sure that they're doing kind of the highest and best use of those infrastructure funds at this point. And so just waiting for some more information on that. One item that I'll point out to you that is gas tax funding is just well refurbishment of $250,000. And so water staff, again, are looking at which well would be best to spend those funds on. And again, gas tax has a lot of kind of eligibility around water infrastructure. And so it's a good use of those funds. And then there's the water portion of the instrumentation and controls project. Again, about $500,000 total between water and sewer 2024 to 2026. And so those are amounts there are identified as well as funded by gas tax. Okay, any other questions on the water capital?
Good, thank you.
Just looking at the funding related to that, a variety of things, but significant amounts coming out of our water capital, as well as still some funding coming from carry forward funding, DCCs. Again, the assumptions around the ERWS looking at some infrastructure grants and borrowing, those are not known at this point, but basically are placeholders in the financial plan. And gas tax. We don't have any more information yet about that renewal. I was hoping and expecting that we would by this point. And so what I'll do for council once we've gone through the general fund as well is bring all of those uses of the gas tax together so that you can look at that and understand the total impact on that and what funds may be remaining for allocation this year. Just looking at transfers to reserves, we've got our $450,000 a year for our infrastructure renewal. Last year in the financial plan, council approved additional amounts of, I think it was about $650,000 total, which really was keeping our water capital reserve afloat. And so we'll talk more about, are there projects that could be funded by the Growing Communities Fund or gas tax just to allow our capital fund in water to be building more, because it is very stressed. There seems to be a lot of water projects that are pulling funds from the capital reserve. Alternatively, we could increase the rates further to provide more funding that could just be straight into the water fund reserve. And so council could consider that as an alternative as well. We also have our water treatment plant reserve. In addition to what we put aside in the ERWS, there's $20 per year within our water user fees that gets put towards the water treatment plant renewal fund. Again, we could use that capital fund towards some of the ERWS projects, but what that was really meant to be was put aside to build for the ultimate renewal of that facility. And so we have to be careful when we're kind of pulling it to a different project in that the long-term plans, but we'll have to look at all the pieces, right? And I do understand that residents are receiving increases in costs all over the board. And so if there's ways that we can creatively fund some of these projects, I think it is the prudent thing to do. Just looking at our kind of annual cash surplus and deficit in the water fund. So some of those amounts are significant, and that is as a result, I think, of some of those projects that are coming up. And so looking at the use of some of those grant fundings may ease that a little bit, and or looking at a further rate increase. Okay, that's it on the water fund. Next week on Wednesday will be general fund and looking at various departments in the general fund. And then, as I mentioned, January 29th, we'll bring all that together for any direction of council. And just if you wanted to action any of the suggestions or other things that have come to mind, we'll bring a list back to you of those items that have been brought to you so far at that meeting, and could receive direction if you're at a place ready to make that for the first draft, which then we would bring to you on February the 12th. Any questions?
Questions? Tom?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Holmes. Moving on, council, we have it's time to provide for notices of motion for the next meetings. We have 3 notices of motion. Possibly, I'll call for a new one as well from Councillor Beale. 3 notices of motion, one from Councillor Wood, advancement of resolution for provincial remuneration for emergency medical services provided by local governments. First, let's move on. Do you want to present this as your notice of motion? Do you want to read it out at this time, Councillor Wood, or leave it to background information here? Your choice. Okay, go ahead. So before I ask for a mover and a seconder, let's have you read out your notice of motion. Thank you.
It may be a little discussion after I read it as well, but it won't take long.
Yeah, I'll bring it to the floor first, but I'll wait for your.
The preamble on this is the notice of motion is an advancement of a resolution. So we're not going to pass the resolution here
Right.
to go to ABICC. What we're going to do here is council will vote on it, and from here it'll go to the RDN. It does say City of Parksville on here, but there's going to be an amendment to it that'll say moved by the RDN after this. But whereas BC Fire Rescue Service departments operating under career, composite, or volunteer models are experiencing increased demands in emergency medical response calls in support of the BC Emergency Health Services System. And whereas the fire departments that provide these services authorized under the Emergency Medical Assistant First Responder Program currently receive no remuneration for their critical support within the BCEHS system. Therefore, be it resolved that the Union of BC Municipalities endorse and advocate for the establishment of a remuneration system for BC Fire Rescue Service departments providing medical care in conjunction with the BCEHS system, with considerations for the cost of personnel, training, and replacement of consumed supplies.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendations? Moved by, I'm going to say moved by Councillor Wood, second by Councillor Gore. Now discussion. You'd like to elaborate on that, Councillor Wood?
Thank you. This conversation came up, Mayor, at the RDN Fire Services Committee. I was speaking to our chief. All of those words, for the people who are watching or will watch this later, all of those words mean that the province isn't really supporting financially fire departments across the entire province who are picking up the slack for what BC EHS can't catch up with. So essentially, we're going to forward this to the RDN board, and then hopefully the board will pass it. It'll go on to AVICC. Hopefully it'll be on the endorsed block at AVICC. It'll go on to Union of BC Municipalities in September. Hopefully it's in the endorsed block there. And with any luck, the province understands that we need a better system to pay for our fire departments picking up the slack for their responsibilities is what it comes down to. All of these things come back to municipalities, come back to us, increasing property taxes so that we can fund our fire departments to do these things. And so we just want to give the province just another idea. If they're looking for ideas on how to help municipalities, this would be one more. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that, Councillor Wood. I totally support this. I understand what the reasoning is. I spoke to the fire chief as well regarding this. And this is the first step of a fairly lengthy process, but it's a worthwhile step. And I think it's just a matter of bringing it into the province's attention. And I think this is how we have to do it. This is the format we follow. Thank you for bringing it forward. Is there any further discussion at this point? Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council. I think obviously valid concerns here around our emergency services and the challenges with ambulance service and that the fire service picks up the slack. I guess I wonder though about the remuneration terminology on this. Is the goal of this to directly remunerate the fire department, or is it to reimburse expenses that are being paid for by ultimately the municipalities?
Go ahead, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. From my understanding, it would probably, since the fire department uses a municipal finance framework, I'm guessing that the municipality would just have accrual of costs that are related to this from the fire department. So the money would ideally go to the municipality, and then we would be reimbursing the fire department. That's from my understanding. Of course, the fire department would be submitting those expenses that they feel are related to BCEHS to be compensated.
And yes, and then further on that, as my understanding it is in our particular case in the City of Parksville Fire Department, Fire Search and Rescue, we also have the callouts. The callouts would clearly identify those who would qualify for remuneration reimbursement instead of a standard fire call, so to speak, and so forth. And so that's what we would be looking forward to, is to reimbursement on, because we're actually the backup system for the BCEHS. So the remuneration portion would be easily identified as to the callouts. So, Councillor Beale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I'd just like to say I appreciate that this has been included, although it's under notice of motion, that we see that it's in lieu of notice so that we can in fact consider this today.
Yes, we're considering this today. This was provided before the agenda was even drawn up. Yes, thank you. Any Councillor Grants?
I just wonder whether it might be possible to, it seems if the reimbursement might be a better word than remuneration, just it implies that the money is being reimbursed to the person paying for it, which is the municipality or the entity paying for it, as opposed to compensating directly the service people. Does that make sense?
And if I think this is the first step, I think.
Sure, yeah, I think it's just the intent
Yeah,
to me is
yeah,
not clear at all. Like it
That-
looks like the intent is to reimburse the municipalities for the fees that they're
Right.
incurring on behalf of the province. Then when I read it, I was like, well, is this going to be a check that goes to a volunteer firefighter or is this going to be? So it's meant to reimburse the costs that are being incurred by the department, not remunerating the members of the department.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if the definition of a remuneration is with regards to a person, then I think you have a point. In the motion, it says considerations for cost of personnel, training, replacement of consumed supplies. So if it's compensation or remuneration definition.
Maybe a friendly, like little
Yeah.
amendment, and that's all, yeah.
Yeah.
But it makes more sense to me directly, if we're gonna be speaking to this at the AVICC and supporting this and maybe at UBCM, then that's where it should be clear, I think.
Right, and I believe that it'll be tweaked considerably before it even gets to that level. This is just that taking that first step. Is that, okay? You okay with that then? Okay. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. That passes unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Wood. We may have another one coming up. The next motion is from Councillor Gore. Make sure I didn't skip any here. 2 pages here. A, B, okay, this next one is for Councillor Gore. Endorsement of resolution regarding the annual funding for accessibility implementation. Councillor Gore, I'm going to let you read this out as I did with Councillor Wood, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So the recommendation is that Council of the City of Parksville endorse the following resolution for submission to AVICC at the 2024 Annual Convention. Whereas the Accessible British Columbia Act passed by the province in 2021 requires local governments to develop accessibility plans to identify, remove, and prevent barriers. And whereas local governments have limited financial abilities and staff resources to implement those accessibility recommendations on an ongoing basis, therefore be it resolved that AVICC and UBCM request the province create an annual funding such as like an accessibility fund designed to assist municipalities to implement accessibility recommendations.
Thank you for that, Councillor Gore, and as all should recognize that this is just for submission to the AVICC. This is
Right.
just seeking council approval to proceed with that. Could I have, we are going to be moved by Councillor Gore. Could I have a seconder for this? Seconded by Councillor Grant. Councillor Gore, you'd like to speak further on this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the seconder. This act was passed by the province, as we know, in 2021. And this council received the plan, accessibility plan that the Accessibility Committee worked on in November of last year. Very holistic plan. Actually, I have a copy here in front of me. It's lots of recommendations, the things that they want to achieve. I will read out the background that's already been printed on the agenda. The Accessibility Act passed June 17, 2021, required municipalities to establish a committee and create an accessibility plan to identify, remove, and prevent barriers to individuals in or interacting with the organization, which is the City of Parksville. We had a committee that was formed and they adopted the accessibility plan in November last year. They have 34 recommendations with different categories from employment, service delivery, built environment, information technology, and communications. So the city allocated its own funding, the $20,000, with 25 that we had towards the implementation of this. We used some of the money towards the drafting of the plan. But as you can see, the recommendations are huge, from built environment, beach access that we've all been talking about, purchasing equipment, installation, long-term maintenance. So these we already talked about the local governments are how we are limited in our financial resources and the staff time. So the ask is to have this annual funding come to the city municipalities so we can better implement. And at the same time, I'm hoping we can provide a progress report to the council. That's how we use the last year's monies. And we can see a tangible difference in accessibility issues in our municipalities, rather than just another draft plan sitting on the shelf, which the province asked us to do. I'm hoping I'll get council support for this. At the same time, I do want to mention a couple of funding options that do exist currently, and the shortcomings of those, like Spark BC, as you might have seen. This is only one-time funding that local government gets, and only $25,000. And the other one is Disability Alliance BC, that provides funding to nonprofit groups, but not to local governments. And those are not enough when we look at the number of municipalities we have and the total actual dollars that flow down to local governments to do something for accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to mention one thing, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead.
That the other way of doing is like Qualicum Beach, what they are proposing after I had a chat with Councillor Harrison, is they are creating a reserve fund. They're doing a 0.5% tax increase and putting it into an accessibility fund. I personally don't think I would not like us to go that route. So I would look for the senior government to actually give us some monies for a provincial government initiative in the first place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Gar. I totally understand the intent of the senior levels of government by bringing this in, a very worthwhile legislation. But at that same time, the worthwhile legislation should come also with a package to supply resources to the municipalities, because in this particular case, our only resource is the taxation model that we have given to us, which is already straining our taxpayers. And so the resource allocation would be very worthwhile at this time. So thank you for that. Any further comment on this motion? Comment, Councillor Bill? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I certainly want to support this. I will be supporting this, but I also want to add that I have reviewed a number of resolutions that have gone forward, whether it be at AVICC or at UBCM, and certainly there are many that are advanced that are particularly related to accessibility issues. So I think that this, well, in fact, I know that this is a topic that is of great interest in municipalities across the board.
Perfect. Yeah, let's hope we get that same endorsement at AVICC. Yeah, that's the first step. That's great. All those in favor? That passes unanimous. Thank you. The next motion is from Councillor Gore again, regarding conservation of Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere. Now, once again, Councillor Gore, floor is yours to give those background.
Thank you, Mayor. Please bear with me as we read out these long resolution here. Council of City of Parksville endorsed the following resolution for against submission to AVICC at the 2024 convention. Whereas the UNESCO designated Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region includes 5 watershed, coastal Douglas fir moist maritime biogeoclimatic subzone, which is the smallest and most at-risk zone in BC and is of conservation concern. And whereas habitat loss and fragmentation due to human development and unsustainable consumption and production patterns are among the major causes of diminishing biodiversity within the biosphere region. Therefore, be it resolved that AVICC and UBCM urge the province to conserve through the purchase of 30% of lands within this region to meet the 30 by 30 provincial conservation target. And be it further resolved that AVICC and UBCM urge the province, in accordance with the tripartite framework agreement on nature conservation, which was signed between Canada, BC, and the First Nation Leadership Council, to include land conservation policies within the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region. I think that's it.
Thank you for that. Could I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Wood. Further discussion, starts with, Councillor Gore.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Again, I would refer back to my background package that was part of the agenda. So the agreement that the resolution talks about was between the feds, the province, and the First Nations. Objectives are protection in 4 areas, including habitat and ecosystem conservation and protection, enhancement and restoration, species at risk protection and recovery, and foundational knowledge and information sharing. And the key goal is to advance Canada and BC's commitment to protect at least 30% of BC's lands by 2030. There's a lot of background here. I don't want to repeat myself, but there's a lot of species at risk that fall within the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region. And we know it's also our source of water. The Englishman River watershed falls within this region and in 4 other watersheds. I do want to stress the importance of the biosphere regions. UNESCO designated, we have 3 in BC. The one near Port Alberni, Blackfoot Biosphere Trust region, it has about 62% conservation lands within this region. The other one being Howe Sound on the mainland, it's close to about 42% conservation status. Our biosphere, the third one, is about very close to 8%. So I think there's a lot of work to do. I also had a conversation with the Mabry representative, and they are very supportive of this resolution. I also happened to attend a recent webinar with 2 other councillors, and I'm sorry if I missed the other ones, with the Land, Water, and Resource Stewardship Ministry. And they again talk about how the tripartite framework is exactly looking at protecting watersheds. And their goal is to perhaps buy lands which are privately owned for the conservation purposes. And I know it also falls within the RDN's purview of the drinking water and watershed protection. So I think there is a really good opportunity for us to work together in protecting this sensitive ecosystem, collaborate with the regional partners, higher levels of government and First Nations. Again, we live in beautiful BC, and I think these are the regions that make our province beautiful, our region that drives a lot of tourism and ecotourism. So it makes sense for us to be protecting this natural beauty. Thank you.
Further comments? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor, for yourself to the mover. I already asked you this offline, but I thought I'd ask during the meeting as well. What percentage of the land in the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region is owned by Mosaic? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I think majority of it, I would say. I don't have the exact percentage, but yeah, most of it is forestry land, yes.
Thank you. And Councillor Martin.
As a matter of interest, the Mosaic is about 20% of Vancouver Island, so that's just off the cuff. So I was going to ask, would there be grants from the feds for this, Councillor Gar? We're talking about a lot of money here.
Yes, there is. And I think it was previously mentioned that the province and the feds, the tripartite agreement that they're talking about, I think close to $1 billion has been set aside for purchasing land for conservation. Yes.
Just clarification, did you say 1 million or billion?
Billion.
Billion, okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, yeah, further comments, Councillor Beal?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, reviewing this, the intent is that this could move from here to go to ABICC for further deliberation at that table.
Yes, thank you. No, Councillor Grant?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wonder if it would make sense to forward this to the regional district for consideration, like we were doing at the first motion, since that might have some more weight if we brought in the players from there, like Qualicum Beach. Just a thought or question.
Councillor Wood, yeah.
Thank you, Mayor, through yourself to Councillor Grenz. My theory as well, but I don't know if we have any evidence that it does way more from a regional district than a municipality. The only reason I'm doing it with this fire resolution is because the conversation originated at the Fire Services Committee through the RDN. But I'm definitely open to hearing other opinions around the table. Thank you.
In my feeling as well, this should be City of Parksville resolution to present to AVICC. I think it's, if you want maybe a better chance of, getting it to the level other than now, you're going to have to look for 19 other individuals to sign on with it at the RDN. I'm suggesting that the City of Parksville should, in my opinion, should run with this all alone if it's so passed by council. All that I can say is I have reservations with this. My reservations to this is all about the 30%, this 30% factor, and recognizing the fact that I understand 30 by 30, and I get it and how it works for the rest of Canada when we have huge portions of land which are crown land associated. We unfortunately do not have that here. As we pointed out, the mosaic, the cost to do this would not only be for the land value, it's the huge timber value that would be lost. I mean, I understand that the timber value is necessary to protect the biodiversity. So somewhat of a catch-22 there as well. But the huge timber value that the request by mosaic, as well as the land value, I feel would exceed your $1 billion easily, just for one land purchase. So for as far as my basis is for not supporting something that I feel is not doable, that's what I won't be supporting this in that particular case, because I just think the ask is too large. It is not reasonable. So that's why I won't, but I'm just one person. Thanks. Councillor Martin.
You can tell. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm getting ready to say something.
Go ahead.
Yes. Sometimes you put a figure out there, 30 by 30, and you shoot for the star. But if you even got half, it could make a difference. Doesn't mean it has to be the whole thing. I mean, it would be nice, but it's not necessarily a need to. So that's just my outlook. I'd rather do part than not at all. That's how I look at it. So I will vote to support this. Thank you.
Yes, and to that end, it does actually say 30%, and it's not saying but half is okay, unless the terminology would change to say some or a percentage or something like that. 30% is still too large for my budget. Thank you.
If I may, Mayor, thank you. Yeah, the 30% comes back to the agreement that's in place and the monies that have been put aside.
Right.
So it's kind of catch the eye of the province, say, this is what you promised, and the feds. So this falls within their,
Yes,
yeah,
I get it.
what they've set
I get it.
aside.
Thank you. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I can appreciate that, following up on Councillor Martin's comment and your own, that one might not get there in one fell swoop, but as someone who took up running a few years ago, I never thought I'd get to a half marathon, but I did a few times, in fact. But I do read this as urging the province to, and there is wording in here that I think implies that the one might work towards a particular goal, but I don't know that it necessarily means that it would either achieve that goal or that it would get there immediately. So I think the use of the word urge helps to modify that somewhat.
Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might just weigh into that a little bit since it's been brought up. If I were the provincial or federal government, I would be very unlikely to do what is being asked here, just in terms of the cost to do that versus in other areas. In order to reach the goals of preserving 30% of whatever area that we'd want to be talking about, even, if we're looking at BC or Canada, there are going to be much better ways to reach that goal without a huge cost. So I can see the point that you're making. And I think in passing this It would be more signaling our values as a council that we want to see preservation happen. But recognizing maybe that the AVICC resolutions carry ultimately only a sort of signal weight and not really, they don't really influence policy in my experience at the provincial or federal government too much. So.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Grants. And my other concern is that this land mass that you identified could very well be quite possibly within the First Nation treaty negotiations for land negotiation that they're working throughout British Columbia on. And I would suspect very strongly the large amount of land mass that is talked about right here that would be included some of those lands that are in consideration for land negotiations with First Nations. So I think it's an awfully large ask at the province at this time. So anyway, further comments? Okay, I'll just call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries, opposed by Mayor O'Brien. Now we have, actually, notice the motion are given it at the end, I believe, Mary. I just double check. I'll make sure. Here we are. Yeah, I skipped it here. Yeah, here we are. And so we have a notice of motion. Councillor Beale has indicated she has a notice of motion to present at this time for the next council meeting. Councillor Beale, if you would.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, and I believe that everyone has a copy, but I will read it out, and I do appreciate your time and your listening. And this is a notice of motion, so it's not, further work might be done. The notice of motion that staff be directed to prepare a comprehensive report on the recent extreme weather response plan, including but not limited to the following: successful implementation of the plan, interagency involvement, challenges and/or gaps in service provision during the extreme weather events, communication strategies employed and their effectiveness, recommendations for planning and improvements to enhance the City of Parksville's preparedness and response capabilities for future similar extreme weather events, and that all relevant stakeholders, including emergency services, community organizations, and the public, be invited to contribute to the report by providing feedback and insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Beale. And so that will be, notice of motion is now provided and will be included in our next regular council meeting, City of Parksville. Thank you for that. And we are moving on to liaison reports. We'll start with Councillor Martin on liaison reports, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Oceanside Homeless Task Force, our last meeting was on January 10th, covered mostly the emergency cold weather shelter. On Thursday, January 11th, Qualicum Council passed the support of a night shelter at Qualicum Christian Fellowship. Parksville public buildings are open during the day for warmth. There is a day shelter at Oceanside Community Church. It was also confirmed that there is free bus transportation for those going to these locations. So I thought I'd just pass that on, that it took most of our meeting and we weren't even finished last Wednesday. And there's a second meeting coming up this Wednesday as a result of for the Homelessness Task Force. So I'll pass that on. Anyone got any questions or comments or anything? No?
Sorry, there is no comments from the audience at this time. Thank you very much. If you cannot refrain, please leave the room.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Your next, Councillor Martin, Parksville Downtown Business Association.
Yes. It was quite a fun day on New Year's Eve. We had a Happy Noon Year event, December 31st at Memorial Plaza, and was well attended. The event began at 10:30 a.m. with face painting, cookie decorating, magic show, plus music, plus hot chocolate and popcorn. At 12 noon, balloons were dropped to announce the noon year. I was helping serve hot chocolate, and had brought Parksville pins, which were gone immediately. I ran out of pins and I got to get more pins for the next event. before next year. But it was so much of a pleasure seeing all the families and children. Folks from all ages were there enjoying possibly 300. The PDBA did an excellent job with their volunteers and business associates that put that together in a very orderly manner. And I was just thrilled to be there. It was a wonderful thing. We even had the good Lord gave us some good weather, so. that was
Yeah,
great.
it was nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So happy New Year. Balloons came down, the whole thing. It's
Thank you.
fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We also have a liaison report by Councillor Beal.
Thank you very much. Just a very brief report from the Chamber of Commerce. Although the meeting was postponed, I did have an opportunity to meet with the executive director and get a little bit of an update. So they are working presently on an events calendar that will come out for the presumably for the year or a good chunk of the year. And they're working on finalizing the budget with, of course, a focus on fiscal responsibility and working very hard on their strategic plan. They also have an event coming up very soon, but that's all I have to report at this time. So they are working hard behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beal. Any other notices from the liaison people that haven't been brought to my mind? No, thank you very much. I'd like to ask for a mover and a seconder for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Gore, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you, council. Good day.